All right, hey guys, I'm Steven. I'm a commercial sales rep with Walton's. I also used to be a butcher, plant manager at a shop, worked there for about 18 years, so have quite a bit of experience with deer processing. So they asked me to come out here. I think it's the only reason they asked me to come out here. But we've got a couple of deer. We got a buck that was harvested yesterday. We gutted it, skinned it. We've also got a doe. We're just kind of walk through some of how to break it down. That way, if you have any questions, you want to try doing this stuff at home, kind of just want to show you it's very possible to do this at your home. You may not be able to tell from the camera, but we're using literally a folding table. We've got some PVC legs to bring it up to a cutting table height. So it's not like we've got hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment. We've got some stuff that literally you could do at your house. So that's kind of what we want to do. This is a buck, kind of shot near the shoulder neck area, so we're going to have a little bit more of the blood there. So we are going to avoid some of those areas, mainly just to protect our product at the end. Other than that, everything looks really good. Obviously, we weren't at a processor, so some of these things, like you might have slight little bit of hair because we don't have a ton of water pressure just from the skinning process. So we'll make sure to clean that all up. First, we're gonna take this deer apart, and then we'll come back and do some cuts, like say out of the hind legs, cutting the back straps, things like that. So the first thing I want to do, literally the shoulder is free floating. I don't know if you saw that. I can literally stretch that muscle. I'm just going to get my knife in here, and I'm just going to remove this. The one thing I want to make sure I'm not doing is cutting into the back strap. And yeah, when you open this up, you might not be able to see it from over there. You can see where that shot came in. I think John's going to come over here and get us some pictures and things like that. The main thing we want to avoid is getting into the loin, which when you pull this back, you can see that loin, and you just don't want to get into that because you want your back straps. So I'm just taking that off. Again, there's no bone connecting this. It just comes straight off. So we're going to throw this to the side right now. We'll come back to our quarters. Then what I like to do is kind of get some of this flank meat here. Make sure not to cut into that hind leg, but just get in here, kind of get into that joint where that leg kind of meets the actual body of the deer, and follow that rib meat right here. We also want to make sure that, you know, if you're doing a deer that you gutted, you know, if you had some issues with, I don't know, maybe a gut shot, or maybe you poked a gut and you got some mess in there, we want to make sure that we're not throwing a bunch of dirty, nasty, contaminated bacteria meat into our grind. So we did a good job. There was no gut shots. Both of the deer that we got yesterday were actually fantastic shots. Like I said, this one kind of hit the shoulder and went to the neck. Right here, literally all I'm doing is, like I said, I got that flank meat, and I'm following the pattern of that rib, and I'm just going to pull it all the way up. I can come back later and I can clean this up. Like in the top, I'm going to show you this as soon as I pull it off. We're going to get a little bit of blood right here. I'll come back and clean all that up. We don't like a lot of fat from deer. It looks like this one was eating pretty good, but he is pretty lean. We'll come back and clean that up. First of all, let's get the carcass taken care of, and then we'll get that off the table. That's kind of how I like to work. So, and then another thing, just from my processing background, I would say I probably processed about 20,000 deer. I don't like to go between the rib meat because of my background. If you shot your deer, you knew you took care of it, you knew you got it out of the field in a good time, cleaned it up real good, I don't think you're going to have an issue. If you want to get that in between the rib meat, go for it. As a processor who's doing deer for other people, you don't know what happened. And sometimes there could be bacteria on the inside of those ribs. And for us, it was one of those things like, hey, we don't want to take that chance of, you know, we're doing 3,000 deer a season. We don't want to take the chance of getting someone sick. So we mainly stuck to the outside of it. But again, if you're doing it from home, feel free to do whatever you want, especially if you know you took care of it. I think we showed a product yesterday while we were skinning, the deer wash, which will help with that bacteria. So that's a good way to go about that. Then when you clear that rib cage off like that, So basically we can see the ribs. There's not any meat left on there. We can go to the neck, and it just literally comes right off of where that brisket bone is. Kind of clean that up. If you want a neck roast, you can do that. We got a lot of, like I said, I think the exit wound came out of the neck, so we're going to clean some of this blood up because we don't want it hitting our other meat. Yeah, so literally I just took that off of there. So I just wanted to clean that up. I didn't want to throw that in with my trim because you don't want that in your sausage meat. So same thing, I've got a lot of, and I'll pull this up whenever I cut it off. On the neck, I've just got a lot of blood in this area. That, again, we didn't have a ton of water pressure out here. We're kind of in the middle of nowhere. I got a little bit of meat there, but I'm protecting my sausage from all those blood clots. So I'm just gonna toss that out, and then I can clean that neck up. If you're not doing a neck roast, which, I mean, some people love neck roast, some people hate it. I just run my knife up the middle of the neck and then come in and clean it up. And I'm gonna show you what that looks like here in a minute. John will probably get some pictures too. So the neck bones kind of make like a cross section. Of course, you got the spine, and then there's a bone that comes off of it like that. So you can see, you can clean that bone up pretty good like that. And then again, we can come back to that. Now the most important part, when you're gutting, we want to protect those tenderloins that are on the inside. So what I like to do is find the spine with my hand, take my knife, run it along the inside of that spine all the way up, just like that. I don't know how much you can actually see of that. I'm on the far side of it. And then I literally like to just make sure I'm disconnected all the way. It's got some pretty good little, and then you can like roll that out of there to get some separation with your hand. So I made one cut there, and then I rolled it up. And then now that I've got it rolled up, I'm just cutting the other side of it. So I'm gonna get some good tenderloins without wasting any of it. And that's one tenderloin off of that buck. We'll definitely come back and clean that up. I'll show you how to do that here in a second. So, and then, yeah, you just want to make sure you're not leaving big slivers of meat in here because, like I said, tenderloin is a great piece of meat. We're going to remove the hind leg now. If you've got somebody to help you, it's really good to have someone like hold the carcass. So John's going to help me out there.
Pull it down.
So I'm going to open this up. We did not get the pelvis split on this one.
But we did on the other.
We did on the doe. So basically I'm cutting on the pelvis and I'm just trying to get it to open up a little bit. So I'm using force right there. When I do that, you can see this ball joint right here. I put my knife in there, start to separate. You're going to get your knife in it. Obviously you can't cut straight through it. You got to use the tip of your knife and get around it a little bit. So once you separate that ball joint like that, again, I'm putting pressure on this hind leg, which is why I need John there doing that.
So you're doing that to open up the joint?
Yes, I'm using this pressure of what I'm doing with the front hand to break this free. And then once you break that ball joint free, now it's gonna like cup. So I'm gonna push down, get around that ball joint, and then it's gonna go back underneath it because you have a sirloin underneath here. So we wanna try to get as much of that as possible. So if you saw, my knife went back underneath it, and then this hip bone flattens out. So
Steven, is that a super flex knife or?
it's just the Victorinox 6-inch curve flex, not a super flex. This is literally the knife that I use pretty much for almost anything except for cutting steaks. So this hip bone flattens out. Once you get to the end of it, you're gonna cut back and go underneath it because it's concave under this hip bone. So now I'm gonna come back, follow this hip bone with the tip of my knife. You can see my knife is curving because I'm putting pressure on it. And I'm gonna cut all this meat out in the concave structure of that hip. And if you were on this side, you could see that we followed that bone So all of this right here was underneath that hip structure. So we broke the bone off right here. Let me turn it this way so you can see it better. Ball joint right here. We broke that loose. And then if we would have cut straight down, we would have cut all this off. So that's why when you break the ball out, you don't go straight down. You start using the tip of your knife and go underneath it. And then you just remove the hind leg. So we're gonna put this to the side. Again, we're gonna come back and teach you how to break that down too. Lastly, on this side, there is a hip bone right here from where we just disconnected that hind leg. Take your knife, cut straight down that hip bone right there. I mean, it's a solid hip bone, so you'll be able to find it, run your knife that way. Then we're gonna remove this back strap. Okay, we wanna stay tight. A lot of times you can see the line on the deer. We're gonna stay tight to that bone. We're just gonna run our knife up, keeping the side of our knife pressed against that rib cage. And then I just like to pull it straight back. I'm not going super fast. I'm keeping pressure on the rib cage, so I'm pressure towards the camera right now. And then I'm gonna pull it all the way back to that cut. I can peel it out with my hands. And then do the same thing. We've got that spine bone. I'm gonna follow that spine bone with my knife now. Again, pushing down pressure on the spine so that I can remove all of this. Usually we can get a little more length out of this. When I say a little more, I'm talking like maybe an inch or two. You can see the shot kind of went through that part of it right at the tail end near the neck. It's actually, I might be able to show it to you. We'll show it to you after I do the other side. It's pretty much right where the tail of that backstrap is. So again, backstrap out, pretty clean. We're gonna remove a bunch of this stuff, show you how to remove the silver skin here in a second. So that's one side of the deer we've got pretty clean. We can still come back and clean some of it up now that we've really cleaned it up. Make sure to get all those pieces that we want. We don't want to miss any meat, but we also don't want to put any bad meat into our grind or into our sausages. So there's a fine line between leaving meat on the carcass compared to ruining your grind, ruining your sausages because you're trying to put too much stuff in it that is kind of questionable. So get as much meat as possible, but also consider what you're making afterwards. If you're got a sharp knife and you're really messing with the neck bone, you could potentially scrape off some of that bone because the ends of those bones are not super strong. The middle of the bone is going to be pretty strong where you can't do it off. The outsides, you might be able to scrape off. So you just want to be a little careful. John, if you want to hold that front leg, and if you scrape off bone and get it into your grind, you can ruin, I don't know, 20, 40 pounds of grind with just one little bone. So he's going to hold that for me. We're going to do the same thing. I'm just going to separate that flap from the hind leg. I will tell you it's about 25 degrees right now.
Pretty cold.
And this is more, almost getting a little more frozen than just cold. So we're going to do the same thing. Start with the hind leg. The reason I didn't remove the front leg now is because I need his leverage. So he's going to hold that. I'm going to separate this off at that ball joint just like we did before. Again, we don't want to put just so much pressure on it that we cut off a lot of that round. Also wanted to say that there's a million ways you can do this. People break it down from a rail. We just wanted to show you, I don't see a lot of people breaking the entire deer down on a table. So we kind of wanted to give you, if that's your only option, hey, here's how you can do it. So again, I broke free from the joint. And now coming back underneath that hip bone, hind leg out. We got all that meat right there, joints right there. We'll come back to that. We'll go ahead and just remove this shoulder. Again, free floating. I like to just pull it and separate it a little bit.
Steven, I'm going to shoot the next one handheld.
Okay.
So you have one static and one handheld.
That sounds great. That way you can get some of these. I do like to cut with the backbone of the deer towards me. Is it correct? I don't know. That's just how I was trained. That's how I've always done it. We got a lot of blood. Looks like the shot came through the shoulder. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that before we just set that out there. Got that front shoulder off. We're just going to do the exact same thing. You're going to follow that rib bone. When you're doing this little flank right here, just make sure, because you can see the tenderloins right here. If I cut down too far, I'm going to cut into my tenderloin. So just make sure you don't do that. You don't want to ruin that tenderloin. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and take it out right now. So follow that seam down the middle, just where that backbone goes down. Again, right down the middle. Get your hand in there. You can kind of roll it. When you roll it, now you can go to the ends, give it a little cut, and a lot of it will start to remove itself. And then you just got to do a little cut on the side here, and it comes out. So you can see the shape of it. This side is up against that backbone. So just do a straight cut on that, roll it a little bit, and then give a little cut on this side. And you're going to be able to get that out pretty easy without separating your tenderloin. So now I'm just going to take some of this rib meat out, some of this neck meat out. Got a little blood around the neck just because of where the exit wound was. So I'm going to take that out. You can see all that right there. Also, these were both shot during rifle season, so obviously we don't expect the bullet to be in there if we have an exit wound. If you are in archery season, you want to be real careful if that you don't have the end coming out. I've had butchers in the past, get a pretty good cut on them hands. Those things are like razor blades. So if you've got your broadhead still stuck in there, you want to be real careful where it's at. That way you don't cut yourself.
Inspect your broadhead to make sure you didn't lose a blade in there.
Yeah.
Because it can be stuck in there on the rib.
As good as grinders can be, you can really mess up some, like even commercial size grinders, you can mess some stuff up pretty easy. I'm just going to take a minute to clean up this neck where the shot was. We do have a little bit of bone in there. So that's why you really want to get that shot area inspected and cleaned, because when that shot came through, it broke off some of that backbone there. So we're definitely going to remove that. We don't want that in our shot. We don't want any of the sausage. To me, better safe than sorry. Could I have cleaned that up slightly better? Yeah, but I don't want to chance it. One, this isn't my deer. So I'm not the one who's going to be eating all the sausage. So we're going to protect Todd and those who are in the podcast who shot these deer. We don't want them biting into a piece of bone, getting a bloody bite. Same thing, we're just going to follow the rib cage here, remove all this meat. We also have a doe. I think we're going to get some footage from it. If you compare the two, you're going to notice the difference of the fat layer, one on the rib cage. The doe's got a decent amount of fat on it. Also has a lot of kidney fat right around those tenderloins. So deer fat does not taste good. I don't care what anybody says. Don't save any deer fat into your mix. It just doesn't, it's not going to give you the flavor you want. Fat is for flavor. Pork, beef fat is much better. Just again, we got that hip bone right here. We're going to go straight down between those ribs, vertical with our knife, and we're going to follow that rib all the way down, removing this back strap. And once you get really good at this, you can go pretty dang fast. We'll just follow it down, and then once we get there, we're going to go follow the spine. Again, turning my knife this way to follow the spine down. And just making sure we're not leaving backstrap meat on the carcass. And then this comes right out there. Again, we'll clean that up. in just a second once we get the carcass out of the way. You can see we got a little bit of meat that I can pull off of this neck here. So once you get it broken down like this, the deer's pretty much broken down. Now you can go back and analyze what you've already done and see where we need to go from here. So yeah, that's how you would break down the carcass. At this point, if you got a dumpster, wherever you're putting your carcasses, wherever you're allowed to, I know it's different with different states, you can just toss this to the side. Where do we want to put it?
Right there for now.
Lovely. All right, so let's do some of the smaller things first. We got a trim pile there. So on tenderloins, they're pretty easy. You can actually trim a lot of this with your hand. So what I did is I grabbed this, it's called the chain. It's that little bitty side that's actually not a part of the tenderloin. So just grab it and pull it. Put your hand on this side, pull that off. So that's literally like super easy to trim that if you pull it off correctly. If you cut it up, if you have a cut right here from when you gut it, when you pull that, sometimes that'll rip in half. So now I'm just going to remove some of this meat off of this fat piece here, because I don't want the fat in my grind, but I do want that meat. And you will have to forgive me. My hands are freezing cold, so they're not working quite as well. So even on that chain, just remove the meat. Now I've got fat. Fat's going there. So
No complaints, Steven.
it's super cold out here. I don't know how you're doing it. You don't even have gloves on. So same thing, got a tenderloin. I'm just gonna grab it, separate that fat and that chain from it, literally pull it off like that. If you've got anything you need to clean up, great. There's a little bit of silver skin right there, so I'm just gonna remove that off. Just like so. Oh, that's silver skin. I don't want that there. Just like that. I mean, other than that, there's not much you got to do to a tenderloin. They pretty much take care of themselves. Again, we're going to clean up some of that meat off of that chain. Again, not getting any, trying not to get any of that fat. Will you get some of the fat in there? Yeah, inevitably you're going to get some of that fat in there. Okay, let's move to the back straps. So back straps kind of similar. There's some peeling that you can do really without a knife. If you'll see, this is the larger side of it. This is the tail of the back strap. There's this really thick piece right here. If you just cut that off first, it makes life a whole lot easier because it doesn't like to peel. So literally just cut that off, just like a tendon that's holding that on there. We're just going to completely remove that. And then what we can do, go to the tail of it. I like to just kind of pinch it and it'll start to, again, separate itself. A lot of deer processing you can do without a knife. Obviously you need a knife, but see how I'm able to pull that right off the end? If we wouldn't have removed that little tendon right there, that would have been incredibly hard to do. So if you just cut it off at first, makes it a whole lot easier. And we're just going to clean up a little bit of this meat right here. Again, we don't want any of this tendony stuff in there. It's going to make for hard spots in your grind. So we'll just clean that up a bit. And actually, just for the sake of video, we'll do that later. So there's a couple ways you can do this. Removing the silver skin. So I'm going to do it one way here where, and you're just removing it by cutting it off, and then I'll show you a trick on the next one. So what I like to do, just get my knife in. You've probably seen a million videos of people doing this. Get in here as you can and just remove that silver skin. You want your knife to be visible from the top. That way you're not cutting in a whole bunch. And just remove it as you go down. Let your knife do the work. You're not forcing your knife through. And you're also not cutting deep.
So a nice sharp knife there.
Yeah, that would be fantastic if you have a sharp knife.
How's that one doing?
That's okay. I've had better.
Well, we can always say on the true one.
Yeah, we do have a true home behind us. I should have probably done that before I started removing silver skin.
For the second.
But even so, just remove that like that. Again, we don't want to throw this in the grind. It's silver skin. One, it's going to have a taste to it. Usually that's what people say is gamey. Also, it's going to give you inconsistency in your grind. It's not just meat. So we remove all of that. There's also this little piece right here. Some people like to remove it, some people don't. I'm of the variety that like, hey, let's just remove this little extra piece of meat right here. I've seen a lot of butchers leave it on because maybe they think it's better for their customers because they're leaving more meat onto that. John, are we cutting these into steaks? I can't remember.
The backstraps?
Yeah, or are we leaving them whole?
No, we're gonna cut them into steaks, but I'm going to verify that right now.
Okay, thank you. So basically, you can see I'm just removing silver skin. Silver skin basically is developed when meat is touching bone. So anywhere this backstrap was touching bone, you're gonna have some, and then like that outer layer, because it was sitting like this, is gonna have that outer layer of silver skin too. So we just wanna protect from that. Let's do the other one. Again, both of these ends had an exit wound. So we do have, you're not seeing the full length of it. As always, anytime I've ever done a video, someone's always like, oh, well, you didn't get the whole backstrap. It's longer than that. Yeah, this one would have been longer than it, but we had an exit wound right here. We don't want to get all that blood. Chance of any bone in it. Same thing, we're just gonna remove this little bit of tendon right here. Make it easier to pull off. Same thing, this is the tail. We're just gonna reach in here, use our hands to get in there, then just yank that off. You do want at the end, if it's starting to separate, just kind of give your downward force with your opposite hand. That way you don't rip the whole thing apart. Everybody loves back straps, so we would just want to make sure that we're protecting that. So now, well, I'm going to show you just a little trick to do the silver skin off the back a little bit. I'm going to remove some of that shot area. So if you are cutting into steaks, you can cut the first steak right here, and then you can turn your knife and just run it down the bottom of that, just like this, all the way down. You might lose a little bit more meat doing it this way, but when you turn that over, it's already done. There's a little bit more meat towards the tail here, and I'm gonna clean that up, and then you have that first steak right here. So that is much quicker, probably a little easier for beginners too, but you have the potential of losing a little bit of meat right here. So we are doing steaks? Perfect. You think they want them butterflied?
I know I'm as fancy as you can make them.
Oh, fancy, okay. So I'm gonna clean this up, get some of that meat off there. Again, we're not working with a cutting table. This is a white folding table with a little bitty thin cutting board on it. If I could have put more downward pressure on it, I probably could have got more off of that silver skin, but I'm also afraid that this table is gonna collapse. So I did not.
Which is mostly what our customers will be working with.
Yeah. So go in, clean this back up. But obviously what I showed you the second time is much faster. Okay, actually threw that meat in that pile, and that's not that pile. Perfect. Okay, so I'm gonna get rid of the silver skin. We're gonna cut some steaks real quick. Just clean the top part off after we got that silver skin. Just wanna make sure that we're not getting a bunch of gristle in there with it. Looking pretty good there. All right, so if you're gonna butterfly, what you're gonna do is you're gonna cut, not all the way through, and then you're gonna do the same cut and go through the table. And then what happens is you open it up. Now you got a bigger steak. So that's, when someone says, do you want your steak butterfly? That's all they're asking. If you weren't doing that and they say, hey, I want it an inch thick, might be slightly bigger than an inch, but that's how that would be. Typically, most people are just going to butterfly. So just as a heads up, when someone says, do you want it butterflied? That's what they mean. So again, first cut, down, second cut, down, pull back. That is also something that I like to, whenever I used to train butchers, cutting is cut to the table and pull back. If you can cut to the table and pull back, you'll cut through it every time. If you're not trying to butterfly and this keeps happening, it's because you're not going all the way to the table and pulling back. So there's some good back straps that are butterflied. We'll knock this other one out here. Are your back straps usually butterflied, Tanner?
No, they usually are down. Yeah.
Do you want it more like this?
No, that's good.
Well, I've got a whole nother one, so I can do whatever you want.
Whatever.
Yeah, that's true. And we're going to package this up. We are using a chambered vacuum sealer later. I'm not sure how much video we're going to get of that. There is the tail. You can save the tail if you want. It can go to grind. It's going to get eaten either way. So now we have tenderloins. We have our back straps cut. I also like to just cut a back strap in half, wrap that sucker in bacon, and just do it that way. That's a fun way to do it. We're going to do a shoulder real quick. So we've got the front shoulder. Again, we know that it wasn't attached by anything. Literally, it's just kind of free floating there. I'm going to clean up a little bit of the blood that's on the backside before I start showing you too much. More commonly, you're going to have some kind of damage to the shoulder during rifle season for sure, just based off of where we're aiming for. So shoulder, neck area. You don't see a lot to the hind leg. You hope you don't, because that would be a terrible shot. But also, a lot of the things that we want to keep are off of that leg. We're not keeping anything off of the shoulder. So basically what I'm going to show you right now is how I like to bone it out. The way I like to do it, I like to flip it over. Again, everybody does this different, so feel free to critique me. I'm still going to keep doing it this way. Elbow joint right here. I just like to come in right here, go down. There's a bone that goes down. When you hit something, now come back up. And you're just basically coming up the side of that shoulder blade. And then I just remove that piece. I'll set it to the side. There is a shoulder roast you can get out of here. Again, I'm not a fan of the shoulder roast. You may be. If so, great. Get it. You should. So got a little bit of fat right here. There was also, again, we didn't have the best water pressure. There's a little bit of hair on that, so I just want to remove that. There's some glands in here and some fat chunks I just like to remove. So get that removed. And then basically what I do, like I said, I had the elbow up. Now I'm going to put the elbow down. And I'm going to come in at the shank. I also don't keep the shanks. Go down, follow that bone up, and then just work my way down. So now I have that piece. Now I'm going to have the inside of the deer towards me. I'm going to clean it up from the elbow. Go down that bone. Flip that up a little bit. Follow the flat part of this shoulder blade. Pull that meat off like that. We want to clean that flat side of that shoulder blade up real good. Get some of that off. Now we're just going to flip it over and do the same thing. Come in from that elbow. Pull that meat off. Now we have the spine of the shoulder blade. So if you've ever given someone a back massage, you felt that long bone, that's what this is. So once we cut down to this bone, I'm going to turn my knife up and I'm going to run it down the spine of that bone. Turn my knife sideways and then clean this part of it, the shoulder blade up. Just like that. And then you'll see I have this meat right here, so I'm going to do the same thing. My knife is up and down, run it down that. And then because I'm right-handed, I'm just going to flip it over and get my knife underneath that, now we've really cleaned off that shoulder blade on both sides. So that's kind of what we're looking for there. All we have left is a little bit of shank meat. So I will say you should cut away from you. The problem is I've cut for 18 years and I've cut towards myself. So I can't show you how to do that because it's not the way I'm used to doing it. I do tell people, if you are cutting towards yourself, you're cutting something like this, keep your off elbow up. Because if something slips, you don't pull your hand down. You pull your hand up, so you'll miss your hand. So just a little trick that I've learned over the year. This shank is frozen. So it's cold out here. And where we had this deer was pretty cold. So we've got that pretty cleaned up. I'm not going to worry about getting that all super cleaned up on camera because I want to show you this hind leg real quick. So hind leg right here. Going to remove this little bit of fat that's just sitting kind of over the top of that ball joint. Then I'm going to show you a million different ways to do this. I'm not saying this is the right way. It's just one of the ways. I like to put that little joint up, and then you're actually going to find where you can go down. Go straight down. This is football roast. If you're used to beef processing, this is the sirloin tip. Follow that bone all the way back. And then there's also, if you do this, there's a piece of that sirloin too. So football roast, it looks a little crazy right now. All you have to do is get that flap of meat right there, roll your hand, and then it literally peels itself. On the last bit, you might have to use your knife just so you don't rip the muscle apart. But that's your football roast. Again, also called the sirloin tip. If that's too big of a roast, just cut it in half. You can also cut it into steaks this way, tenderize it, makes pretty decent tenderized steak too. The reason the rounds are a little bit better is because there's more muscle groups in this one. The rounds are one big solid muscle. I believe we're using our rounds for jerky, if I remember correctly. So there is some piece of the sirloin in here. You can get that if you want. Typically, that's not something that people are requesting a ton of. I also like to just remove that right there. Now I've got a decent handle. You can see the seams that work their way down right here. Some people will remove the shank right here. I kind of like having the handle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow that seam with my knife. I'm not cutting all the way through. I'm just putting the tip of my knife in. And then I'm going to follow the femur bone right there. Then I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. Follow that line. And you can feel the bone with the tip of your knife too. And then there's my ball joint. Follow the knife on this side. And now I'm just going to remove that entire piece. So I've got a cut on this side, a cut on that side. I'm just going to connect the two. And a lot of times it's as easy as just doing that. Remove the ball out of there. Now all I have to do is take the meat off the shank. Or if you want to have a deer shank, you can do that too. Now we're left with this round here. On the round, this is the top round. This is the bottom round. The bottom round has the eye of round on it, or on that side. Had a guy, when I was starting in butchering, had a guy tell me, you can remember the bottom round because it has a crack down it. So it's a bottom, it has a crack. There you go. We're making third grade jokes here, John. So we're just gonna open this up. You'll see, before I even used my knife, I just did a lot of pushing. On a beef, this part here that would sit over that shank, that could be the Pike's Peak roast. Never seen anybody utilize it in deer processing, so we won't go over that. But we're just going to remove this right here. You can see, you can pull a lot of that out. Oh, okay.
The wind comes through and makes me colder.
Nice. Are we good now?
We're good now.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to remove some of this connective tissue here. So again, my bottom round's on this side, and the eye of round goes with that side. So I'm just going to work my knife through that. If you cut into some of the rounds, it's not a huge deal. You can always trim it up. You don't have to be 100% perfect. Most butchers aren't, I will tell you. And I'm gonna clean the bottom of that round up. I kind of skin the top of this off, and you can see how it starts to peel itself. As long as this is clean, that's all right to put in grind. If it's dirty, if it's got hair all over it, then yeah, you don't want to throw that on there. So I'm just going to remove some of that top layer right there. Just like that. Remove some of this fat that's around the back side of it. And then this is a top round. So we can take that to our slicer, slice it up for jerky. We can cut it for steaks and tenderize it, whatever we want to do. You can use it for a roast. So there's a top round. Bottom round's right here. Again, this is the eye. This is the actual flat, bottom round flat, if you've ever heard of that at the store. And this is just a little piece of meat that likes to hang off here. So we're going to cut that off. And then I want to show you this. That is the epitome of silver skin. So we want to remove that. All we're going to do, just like before, we want to stay as shallow as possible in our cut and just remove that, okay? Again, that's just like the silver skin before on that backstrap. We have a couple options. You could leave this whole, trim this fat up, and cut what's called a bottom round steak. It actually has the piece of the eye and all that in there. I should probably say something. There's a gland sitting right here. I just removed it. So it looks like fat, and there's a gland inside of it. So you want to remove that. It sits in the section where the eye separates from the bottom round. So we can remove that. And then again, just any fat that we can clear out. We don't want a ton of deer fat in anything, the grind, none of that. So we'll clear that up. The backside, we can trim that up too. We have the ability to separate this eye, especially if we're doing jerky, because now we want our jerky strips to be in full muscle. So we're just going to remove that real quick. Those just separate just like that. And then you have an eye, you have a bottom round. We can clean those up in just a second. I don't have to bore you with cleaning those up. So we have a bottom round, an eye, a top round, and a football roast, which is also called a sirloin tip. So that would be the shoulders, backstraps, tenderloins, the hind. I'm not going to bore you with cleaning up a bunch of trim, and I'm just going to do the other shoulder, the other hind quarter, kind of off camera because you just saw it. I don't want you to have to watch it again. All right, now we're working with the doe. Did seem to be a little bit older of a doe. You can see the fat coverage on this, gonna be a lot more fat when we show you the inside. Got a lot of fat around the tenderloins as well. Neck is definitely smaller. Looked like that buck was in red a little bit, but we're just gonna break the whole thing down again and just run through it real quick. So first thing, I'm gonna just separate. You can see how I separated that, and you see those muscle fibers start to stretch. We're just gonna cut through there. Important thing, again, a lot of the shot comes through here. So we just wanna take our time. We don't have to go slow necessarily, but we don't wanna rush through it because the back strap is just on the other side of it. So we just wanna be real careful. Once we get that shoulder blade out of it, we don't wanna cut, I think I can show you. That right there is the back strap. So we want to make sure we're not cutting into that. And then it's free floating. It just comes right out. Then I'm going to get into a little bit of this flank meat where it meets up with the hind leg. Just going to move that down. Basically going to clear up some function for us here. When we cut down into this joint right here, we want to make sure we're not cutting tenderloin, which is on the inside right there. So if I come down and cut too far, I'm gonna get into that tenderloin, which not a good thing to do, especially if it's not your deer. I'm gonna follow that rib cage, just pull that meat off like that. If you got a decently sharp knife, you're gonna be able to pull a lot of that off. We do have the wound on this side, so we are gonna be a little particular on what we're pulling off. We're gonna clean that up before we dump it into our lug. And you can clean that off literally just by running your knife across the top of it, pulling that off. A lot of that is just like coagulation of blood. So you can do a lot of cleaning just by a simple swipe of your knife. Also want to look for any, like if you feel any crunchiness, we want to remove bone fragments. That way that's not in there. Again, a lot of this stuff's going to grind. We're going to clean a lot of the fat off of this rib section because we don't want that deer fat in our grind. So, but we'll get what we can off of here. Again, we're cleaning that rib section up. As I pull this off, you can start to see that backstrap start to form right there. Don't want to cut into that. That is just a lot of fat. We'll get what meat we can off of that, but we don't want to throw that into the grind. So we'll set that aside. This area right here, again, before you cut it off, you can clean a lot of that off just by running your knife across the top. The coagulation of blood usually cuts pretty smooth right off of there. And then you can actually see the wound a little bit better. You can see if we broke a rib. There's that hole right there. So I'm going to try to avoid that area, making sure not to get any bone chips or anything. But I can just cut that blood right off of there. So it makes it a whole lot easier. Gonna go ahead and remove this tenderloin. Rotate that deer a little bit so maybe you can see it. Right in the middle is the spine. So I'm gonna run my knife straight up and down with pressure up against that spine. I'm just gonna run it all the way back. And then if I can, the buck was a lot easier because you didn't have all this fat, kind of just run my hand in there and kind of roll that tenderloin. If I can roll it, I can start to get underneath it like that and just peel that bad boy out of there. Keep your hands out of the way of the knife. And then just comes out like that. If you saw the buck video, a lot less fat on that one. We'll clean that up here in a second. Now we're going to remove this hind leg. If you'll hold that shoulder, give me a little bit of leverage. We were able to get the pelvis cut on this one just due to it was a female, so it wasn't quite as tight. The bone wasn't as dense. I think that buck had some age to it, and I'm just going to follow the hip bone here until I get to that ball joint. And so I'm just doing a little cut with the tip of my knife. If it's your first time doing it, just do that, and it'll reveal this ball joint that's in here. And then we're just going to cut and put pressure down where it's going to start to separate that. We're just using the tip of our knife, just the tip of our knife. Follow that bone down, start to get that to separate. And then once that ball comes out, we're going to hook our knife underneath it. You just saw it release right there. I'm not putting any pressure with my knife, just the blade being there is going to be what's separating that. Then we're going to follow this hip joint out. It's going to go down and kind of hook out. So again, you don't have to do a lot of force with your knife. Let the leg do a lot of the work, and then just fill out that bone with the tip of your knife. Underneath, it gets a little concave, so just follow it. I'm rotating that leg. I'm feeling where that bone's at. And then it just comes off like that. So all of that's covered right there. That was underneath that hip bone. So we just want to make sure we're getting all of that off. Put that in the lug there. We'll come back to that. So we got the rib meat off, got the tenderloin out, hind leg off, shoulders off. We have the neck, and we've got the back strap. Okay, so on this back strap, there's a hip bone right here, just where we've got the hind leg off. And that bone, you can feel it right there. You're just gonna cut straight up and down after you remove the tenderloin. If you do this before you remove the tenderloin, you're going to cut your tenderloin. So go straight down on that hip bone. And now that's our stopping point. Kind of makes it an easier cut. We're going to get up into this neck. I just put my knife in there. I'm pushing against the rib cage right here with my knife. I do have a flex knife. If you like a stiff knife, that's fine too. Just put a little bit of pressure up against it. That way we're not veering away from that rib cage and leaving some of our back strap. The more comfortable you get with this, the faster you can go. And then it kind of, again, it's going to kind of roll out. And then the spine, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to kind of pull with our left hand or right hand, depending on what you are, your offhand, and then follow the spine with our knife and pull that out. You can see we got a little bit of blood just from the wound. And we're able to get a little bit more on this than we did on the buck, just due to we had a shot right here on the buck. On this one, we're able to extend that a little bit. You can see how the backstrap dies off, tails off right there. We were able to go all the way to the tail right there. We'll come back to that. Cleaning up neck meat, again, we just want to remove all those clots of blood that happened from impact of the shot.
Yeah, there's a lot more on this one.
Well, I think just where it shot, if I remember correctly, when we gut it, it actually had a pretty decent hit to the heart.
Yeah.
So, and then just, we want to clean that up. Again, we don't want to try to get a whole bunch of fat, but we want to remove it so we know what's underneath it. So, again, that structure of how we remove the backstrap, very similar to the neck. It's still the backbone. So what I like to do is just, you can see that yellow tendon right there. I just like to go straight on that neck bone. Go down to where those little wings split off of the spine. Clear this up. And I don't want to bore you with a whole bunch of cutting on camera, but you can get in between each of these little spines too. It all depends on how much time you want to dig into this. On the buck, we didn't do a lot of it, mainly because of where it was shot. It was a bloody mess all in this area, whereas we got the shot a little further down. Just make sure you get a lot of that meat out, and just know there's basically gonna be a structure like this. You've got the spine, and then you've got those backbones coming off the side. So there's usually meat sitting in this pocket right here, and you can get in between all of these spines and stuff too. I've seen great videos of people doing that. We're not doing that today, so if you want to do that, pull up those videos. Other than that, that's going to be how you break down that deer right here. We got ribs. Now, literally what we're going to do now, we're just going to flip it over and do the same thing on the other side.